Aw, thanks. Got a few announcements to go through. First, there's going to be a trip into Monteagle after lunch for anyone who wants supplies from like the Dollar General or Piggly Wiggly or the liquor store. So after lunch at 1 o'clock, there's going to be a group leaving right from the dining hall. From the Adam and Ranger will be leading people to a van. And so just meet outside the dining hall on the grass by the patio there. We're going to do the same thing tomorrow after lunch. So no matter which workshop you're in, there'll be a chance to go to Monteagle. Speaking of McClurg, make sure you've got your name tag on at all times, just because that's how the dining services people know that we're with the conference, so it's like your meal ticket. Plus, that way everyone can get to know each other, and if someone has a crush on you and doesn't know your name, they can just glance at your name tag. And also on that table in McClurg, there's going to be a raffle sign up for Wyatt's book and Jill's book, so sign up for those. Meetings with Mike Levine. We've posted 2 sheets right there on the wall, so check those later, see if you're on there. Tomorrow at McClurg, we're going to put up a sign-up sheet for meetings with Gail Hockman, and those will take place over the weekend. And then there'll be more to come after that. Today at 5:30, there's going to be lawn games on the lawn right outside here. Might be bocce, it might be badminton or croquet, so that'll be fun. And there's a Scholars Open Mic Night tonight, right here at 9:30. So come on out and hear the scholars read. And that's everything. So I am delighted to welcome the bearded and insightful Richard Bausch.
Point the microphone at your mouth. Do not move, lectern, or disturb cables. Okay. I'm glad that my beard can be seen as an attribute. I have, incidentally, it's goateed. I don't know whether you all. I was trimming the full beard and slipped, and I tried to trim it that way, and I went, oh, the hell with it. And then Lisa went, oh, I like that. So now I'm stuck. I have a little story like Jill's story, just to give you a sense that this is not just Jill who has made these sorts of mistakes. When I was 20 years old, I was playing music, and I was going to be a rock and roll star, and I was going to bypass college. I had nothing but unaffected scorn for people who went to college. And I was playing at the University of Illinois, and I had done a lot of wide, indiscriminate reading. I did it all the time, and I was a voracious reader. And I had read everything by this guy, Froude. It was unsupervised reading, obviously. And I'd even read the case histories. It was just such fascinating stuff. And so I was playing at the University of Illinois. I don't want to give you the wrong idea. It wasn't the Civic Auditorium. It was a fraternity house. And I'm standing in the kitchen drinking a beer, which was a large part of my pay. And I was talking to this tall kid. And I said, so what are you studying at this college? And he said, psychology. And I said, have you read Froude? And he said, who is that? And me being me, I got everyone's attention at the party. Hey, everybody, hey! Here's a guy, pointed to him, studying psychology at the University of Illinois, never read Froude. And he looked down at me and said, do you mean Freud? And he was taller than I was. And I said the second stupidest thing I ever said in my life. I said, him too? Anyway, I decided shortly after that to go to college, really mostly because it was another 4 years and not having to work a 9-to-5 job. The first thing I had to read was published in the Oxford American under the title The Story of a Novel. And I changed the title a year or so later for a book of essays I was thinking of doing. It's called Fiction is Not Life, but the Semblance Thereof. One of the mistakes that inexperience always gives us is this sense that you have to put life on the page. It's a good urge, but it's a mistake, because you're not putting life on the page. You put someone in a dentist's office in a story, and you render that dentist's office with such loving detail because you want the reader to feel the life, the reality of that dentist's office. And what do you do when you're in a dentist's office? You pick up a magazine to read it to get the hell out of the dentist's office. So I say to students, if you got somebody in a dentist's office, something better be going on. He's lusting after the woman across the way, or wondering what's wrong with her teeth, and worrying about his own, and having something to do with a context that involves a story. So I say it's not life you're putting on the page. It's fiction any more than it's life you're putting on a canvas. It's paint. So that's really what this is about. And the novel it's the novel that this is about the writing of was called Violence. It was published in 1992. And the first part of it, there are the couple of sections where there are quotes from the novel. In the convenience store, the small Oriental woman, that's how long ago it was written, behind the counter looked at him with something like wariness, but then she smiled. Her teeth were an amazing shade of yellow. He nodded, walking past her. He had come in simply for the light and the heat. There was nothing he wanted. Standing between two rows of merchandise, he looked at the bottles of antacid, containers of aspirin. He turned and was confronted with a man wearing a nylon stocking pulled down over his head, the foot part of it dangling like a clownish appendage to one side. The man held what Connolly realized with a spasm of the muscles around his heart was a shotgun. "Jesus Christ," he said, "don't shoot." "Good evening," said the gunman. "Welcome to the end of the fucking world." I was just out of the Iowa Writers Workshop teaching part-time at 4 different schools, working as a weekend recreation director for Fairfax County, where I had a little badge on my chest saying, "Welcome, I'm Richard Bausch," with a smiley face, and spending evenings delivering phone books. I was writing stories late at night, usually all night. The stories were not very good, and I was tired all the time, and always worried about money. One evening during end-of-term exams, a colleague and I were sitting in my office talking, and he told me about a young woman, a student of his, who had missed taking her final and whom he had excused. "She's already got an A for the class," he said, "and besides, I didn't want to put her through it after she told me why she missed the exam." He went on to explain, of course, and as he did so, I had that odd, agitated, perturbed sense that has always signaled an imprint on my memory. I can't come closer than this to describe it either, this feeling, which I've learned to trust entirely, that something has dropped into my being and will leave a permanent mark. What he told me was this. His student, let's call her Michelle, had been studying for her German exam, and it had taken her well into the hours after midnight. She'd grown sleepy and couldn't concentrate, so she put her coat on and went out and walked down to the local convenience store to buy some instant coffee. She told my colleague that she hadn't any idea what was wrong when she went into the place, but that an odd quiet made her pause. As she told it, she turned in the narrow aisle where the coffees were displayed and found herself looking into the twin barrels of a shotgun. "Excuse me," she said. "Move," a face beyond the twin round holes said. She saw a sweaty, distraught young man's face. He touched the end of the gun to her chin. She felt the cold steel and smelled some kind of oil. She told my colleague that she just couldn't keep from taking the barrel of the gun between her index finger and thumb and very gingerly moving it away from herself. "Could you please," she told the gunman. "It's hurting my chin. I'll do what you want, really, only please. It's uncomfortable." The gunman, growing more and more nervous, put the barrel of the gun back and pressed it a little, moving her for some reason toward the entrance of the store. "Could you really, if you don't mind," she said again very gingerly, taking hold of the gun barrel and moving it aside from her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's hurting my chin. The smell makes me feel sick." This happened 2 or 3 times while the two of them moved slowly to the entrance. By this time, police had come and were arrayed outside, 3 squad cars. Turns out they were chasing the gunman from another robbery down the street. He had come into the store to seek a hostage. Michelle understood this in the same moment that she once again took the barrel of the gun between her index finger and thumb. "I'm really sorry, but could you please?" She was horrified at her own inability to keep from making these demands, carefully polite as they were on the stranger who might kill her at any minute. The important thing, the overriding thing, was the terrible discomfort of the steel against the bones of her jaw. That fact had its own force, separate from her somehow. So there she was, standing on the sidewalk, outside the convenience store, moving the gun barrel off her face, still again, murmuring, "I'm sorry, I can't help it, it's uncomfortable." Except at this time she realized that she could grasp it, push it toward the man. She did this, and immediately the police were on them both. She was thrown to the ground, and for a moment it felt like a big pile-up, legs and arms flailing, bodies covering her. No shots were fired. Apparently the gunman was wielding an empty weapon. A scared kid who wouldn't really harm anyone, she said. She told the story laughing, and my colleague related it to me laughing. It was funny. No one was hurt. She got her A in German and went on with her life. I told her story for years. People always laughed when I performed the motion of politely moving the gun barrel away from the chin, and I would repeat the phrases as I had heard them. "Could you please, if you don't mind?" I don't recall exactly when I thought of this event in terms of fiction, but I do remember that I saw it as being a killing almost on the instant it occurred to me as something to build a story on. I was writing stories, and this would be one of them. I would take someone into that convenience store and put him through the trauma of a robbery in which killings took place. I had a sense that the story would lead to some defining moment of fear and trembling where I would leave it. I decided my character would be a man, probably out of nothing more complicated than the fact that my natural tendency is to set things out of remove from the lived facts. If it had been a man telling the original story, I probably would have created a woman for the part. I don't know if I had actually begun writing the story. If memory serves me, I had not. I was carrying it around, daydreaming about it while working on other things. I considered that this story, which I would call Violence, would be one of the closing stories in my collection, The Fireman's Wife. But then one afternoon, during a long walk, it came to me that the subject of the story I was planning must not be the event in the convenience store, but everything that happens afterwards. I began to understand that what truly interested me was the life one had to lead when the terror was over. That television and movies and books had always concentrated so much on the violent act itself, and so much of that material had bordered on the pornographic, as far as I was concerned. Pornography really being little more than a dull, unimaginative insistence on the biological facts, that what one saw, even in the supposedly serious news media, was a crude interest in the violent moment, the tragedy, as they like to call it, and a universal reticence about the aftermath. So that became the plan, and very quickly it became evident that I was going to have to write a novel to tell it right, and that the novel would start with the violence in the convenience store. I told students and friends that what I was going to do. I said glibly that the first 11 pages would be the most harrowing pages I ever wrote. I wanted the book to be relatively short, to have no chapter breaks nor any kind of relief. It would move through the violence to its paralyzing effects in one long gasp, like the great heaving sigh of Sibelius's magnificent Seventh Symphony, which I had been listening to incessantly for months. That was the plan, at any rate. A person starts out to complete an ordinary daily task, worried about money, worried about a sour stomach, worried about babies and work and growing children and all the vague dissatisfactions, looking forward to some pleasure or peace and entertaining all the expectations and requirements, all the longing for love, for a little beauty, for the acts of kindness, the caresses and kisses, and in 10 terrible minutes someone else, for no discernible reason or for reasons too specific to understand, politics or ideology, or the old terrible repetition of what was remembered or coveted or hated, someone, a stranger, canceled everything out, stopped it all with a gunshot to the base of the skull. I began composing the novel on legal paper, lying in bed in the mornings. We had a new baby in the house and were often up at night, and it was just easier to work in the bedroom rather than what was then my studio, a room downstairs in the farthest reaches of the house. I worked through the early morning hours each day, and sometimes I worked in the afternoon, sitting at one of my favorite places to work in that old house, the kitchen table. I had a written draft in less than 2 months, but it wasn't very satisfactory. There were lines I liked and little else. My then editor, Alan Peacock at Simon & Schuster, read what I had and felt that the violent convenience store scene which opened the book left him vaguely detached because he didn't know my central character well enough to have feelings about him. I began to recast everything, moving the violent scene into the book. I came to see that if I simply portrayed this one man's reaction to the event, I would be duplicating the topical crap that we are all swimming in all the time anyway. The whole story didn't quite make the kind of sense I was searching for. It didn't resonate. Didn't satisfy me in the reading of it, the way a book does when I begin to know it's done. It wasn't until the third or fourth draft when I began to realize that my character, Charles Connolly, had suffered violent abuse as a child that I understood the theme which lies at the center of the novel like a homily. One does not have to repeat the cycle of violence. One is, after all, free. The whole country loved murder and entertained such avid curiosity about it. You could make a body count any night of the week, and none of it was like the real thing, the sheer inanimate weight of the dead, the lightless stare and the blood. He remembered that there had been so much blood. The book was published in January of 1992, and my new publisher, Sam Lawrence, sent me on a multi-city book tour with it. The first stop was New York, and Tim O'Brien was there, and we went to Elaine's that night and had a wonderful time, and I'm not sure anyone around us had as much fun as we did. But it was a great night. And I think Morgan Entricken was there too, a couple of other folks. The book was published in January of 1992. My new publisher sent me on a multi-city book tour with it. Magazines wanted to interview me and some people, media people as well. I was on several national radio programs and a cable television talk show, and the Washington Post sent an earnest but unfortunately rather dull young woman out to my house to do a profile. The subject was violence. Everybody wanted to know what I thought of it. Some wanted to know if there had been something in my past, some trauma I had been through. There was even the sense that I had been exorcising some ghosts, and I had to take care to explain that I had simply wanted to tell a story, that in my mind, if the novel didn't work as a story, then its sorrowful subject was meaningless. The summer after the book appeared, Clint Eastwood released his supposedly anti-violence movie, Unforgiven. Everyone seemed to think that the stated theme that violence is a bad thing was the movie's central impulse. The movie was lauded for this stance by movie critics mostly, but by others as well. Eastwood was turning his eye to the horror of violence, they said, and well, that movie is not about violence, but about skill. And in it, Clint Eastwood's killer recovers his through a stirring course of setbacks and troubles, just in time to commit mayhem. The film is well made, but the violence is very routine. I believe that if one is to write truthfully about violence, one has to see its threads in our daily lives, and to understand that separating the kinds of violence does nothing to portray violence itself, the violence that is done to us and the violence we do, and it does nothing to examine our weird fascination with it, our love of it. While our national life has been marred by assassinations and attempted assassinations, our daily existence is brutalized on every side and in every way. The very landscape exudes violation, with its mountains of refuse and its ugly, spiritless canyons of glass and stone. Every single year, the number of shooting deaths in this country surpasses the number of men killed in the whole Vietnam War. Yet there is no outcry. There have been no marches, no protests, no gatherings, no songs asking why. The slaughter continues. The movies and television, including the news, lavish great care and expense to provide us with a steady stream of bloodshed, and recently here in Virginia, our bright, forward-thinking Neolithic legislature passed a law making it legal to carry a concealed weapon. If one is a pie-eyed optimist, one imagines people looking back at us, wondering how we got through the days, how we lived in such terrible times. I wrote violence to these faraway people, of course, in the perfect understanding that in all likelihood it would never reach them or much of anyone beyond my little sphere. But in writing about Charles Connolly, a man so terrified of doing harm to anyone that he is willing to do violence to himself to prevent it, I found that I was writing not so much about a violent act, but about gentleness, and what a gentle spirit does when confronted with the possibility of violence and the dreaded capacity for it. Okay, that's enough of that one to read this. The real point of that is simply that we don't really know when we start out what we have. We find out by going there. You make the path by taking the path. Now, because I have been seeing a lot of this in manuscripts, not just here but everywhere I go, I'm going to read something. I think I might have read this last year, but I think it's important, and I did some things to change it. I hope that's all right. I didn't mean to make it sound like a sermon. Let me explain a little about close third as a suffocating thing in the stories of inexperienced writers. It happens to be fine as a fictional strategy if used in concert with the other kinds of gradations of distance and other tools available to the writer to bring the context of the story into enough focus to make the drama matter. The trouble is that so few inexperienced writers really understand its use. This is not abnormal or it's significant in any way. You will eventually understand it, but when I'm talking about your story, that's what I'm talking about. It's a thing you'll outgrow if you stay at it. They think of it as something contributing to the drama, the idea being that if you hold things back so the reader will follow out of curiosity, but it is what the reader knows that keeps him reading, and it is context that makes the drama. There has been a perception about me as a teacher that I want everyone to explain all the time and to use exposition alone, and that is not what I'm asking for at all, ever. When I speak of close third as being suffocating, I mean that the writer, in the instance about which we are speaking and in the manuscript we are considering, has begun to suffocate things in the close third. I have said many times that the truest statement about the writing of fiction is that it is a matter of show and tell, and that the writer develops the ability with each story, and you have to make that struggle each time, to know when to do one and when to do the other, and how to meld them together in such a way that the story becomes clear and the effects of it can be felt rather than merely understood intellectually. I read story after story where I intellectually admire it and I feel nothing. I want to feel something. It's about feeling. Laughter is feeling. Don't get me wrong. The whole nature of the artistic impulse is to make feeling. And not feeling is in the use of the word. I don't mean feeling in the use of the word in silly songs by half-baked pseudo-poets and crooners, but feeling as in felt life, as it is delivered in, say, War and Peace. In this scene, among many, the little princess has died in childbirth, and they are lowering her body into the ground, and in death her face has an expression that seems to say, I did no harm to anyone. Why must it be that I am put away like this into the ground? And that is sad and awful enough. But Tolstoy has also given you the context, excuse me, which is that Prince Andrei, her husband and the father of the child, had for months prior to her death been able to feel only irritation when she was near and the desire to be away from her, shut of her when she spoke. We are seeing that expression on her dead face as he sees it. And the context, along with the description of what he sees in that face, makes us feel the depth of his horror at himself and at the remorselessness of the existence we all have to lead. We feel this in our viscera and nerves, and far from the seat of intellect or thought or rationality either. And here is an example from Conrad. I apologize to the class that Aaron and I are teaching. I talked about this yesterday. In his great short story, An Outpost of Progress, listen to the way he sets the scene. Listen to the way, after having set the scene dramatically, he morphs into sheer explication. They were two perfectly insignificant and incapable individuals whose existence is only rendered possible through the high organization of civilized crowds. Few men realize that their life, the very essence of their character, their capabilities and their audacities are only the expression of their belief in the safety of their surroundings. The courage, the composure, the confidence, the emotions and principles, every great and every insignificant thought belongs not to the individual but to the crowd. To the crowd that believes blindly in the irresistible force of its institutions and of its morals, in the power of its police and of its opinion. But the contact with pure unmitigated savagery, with primitive nature and primitive man brings sudden, profound trouble into the heart. The voice that is delivering this is the author's voice, the voice of authority. And look at the word, authority, authority. The passage contains vision and sets the context for what will happen later, which is that one of these men, out of the paranoia of being where they are, will kill the other. In the hands of a less experienced and fully developed artistic sensibility, this is, after all, Conrad. But what I have to say about this is no less true about our difficult but deeply rewarding occupation. In the hands of a writer trying to follow that dictum of show, don't tell, there would be maybe 15 pages of well-intentioned stratagems to show these two men as being insignificant and incompetent. And the story would suffer greatly for all that. The troublesome thing about these kinds of statements about the craft, show, don't tell, write what you know what you want to say, is that they are true in certain instances. But they are not true all the time, and in any case they are not even true enough to take on the force of rules that they have taken on in so many writing workshops. The close third people talk about comes largely from James and Joyce. Remember James's central consciousness, and especially remember Joyce's clay, where you get the lines, the kitchen was spick and span. The cook said you could see yourself in the big copper boilers. The fire was nice and bright. And of course, these are not words Joyce would use in talking, but Joyce delivering these words as his character would speak them. Joyce coming through the character. But in that same paragraph, you get Joyce talking about the character, that slight step back. Maria was a very, very small person indeed, but she had a very long nose and a very long chin. She talked a little through her nose, always soothingly. Yes, my dear, and no, my dear. She was always sent for when the women quarreled over their tubs and always succeeded in making peace. Everyone was so fond of Maria. Now, there is no change of tone here, but there is the delivery of crucial information about this character. There is material knowledge of her as she is perceived by others, and so when the events of the story take place, they have weight. They carry the force of Joyce's vision. They have the distinct sound that is Joyce's voice. So often in close third, what the inexperienced writer does is to make the whole story a puzzle, thinking that when the reader finally parses it, and believe me, most readers won't go far enough to parse it, but when they do, if the reader, they imagine, finally parses it, they'll feel as if they've been told a story, and the writer has taken 15 pages to make clear an instance that should be the first line of a story that would have to then take place. So many times now in classes I get stories that are so locked into only what the central character can see and hear, with that character's history untreated, and with no slight hint of anything about the character, that the result is a blur of inert sentences holding back all the matter that would in fact make a story. There is no story in this practice because there is no author. It's truly the mixing up of the 2 points of view, the objective point of view, as in, say, Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants, and the limited third person, which is the real term for close third of Joyce, which in technique but not in sound is very much like that of Virginia Woolf or William Faulkner, Ernest Hemingway, Catherine Ann Porter, James Baldwin, Truman Capote, and so many others, including a couple of dozen in this room. The drama is only drama when the reader knows what the opposing forces are, what the trouble is. And fiction of all stripes and kind is always about trouble. And the reader will not read on trying to find out what the trouble is. The reader wants to read on to see how a character or character will either extricate themselves or fail to do so in terms of what has gone wrong. Something's the matter in every story. Every story is a war. Something's wrong. My friend Alan Shapiro and I used to have fun imagining the Jerry Springer show with the great characters of literature. You know, there's Oedipus, and below him is the scroll, killed father, married mother, had several children by her, doesn't realize it yet, you know. And so many inexperienced writers will back up from some serious trouble for fear of being melodramatic. How melodramatic is that? How melodramatic is it for a woman to hold on to an insult for 50 years? Or for a woman to sleep with a corpse? How melodramatic is that? We're not talking about melodrama is when the trouble is unearned. The emotions are unearned. It's when the writer is depending on the events to make the story. So horrible events are made up, and the writer thinks that's going to carry the story. That's not it at all. It's who the events are happening to that makes the story, well, no matter what they are. So I used to say glibly and almost as a joke that in the hands of a really good writer, a kid whose mother never gives him enough lunch money is an amazing story. And in the hands of a bad writer, World War II is the dullest thing that ever happened. Even if the outcome is happy, it comes from solving some kind of trouble. It's, as I'm sure you know, what we mean when we say conflict. But the conflict must be inside the story, must be webbed through all the gestures of the story, and not in the reader's sense or lack of it as to what the hell is at issue. Portentousness is just that. And if you don't deliver the goods right quick, it very quickly slides over into pretentiousness. I can't tell you how many times I write in the margin, out with it. A story is what happens in context to people we have been brought to know and care about. And the great thing about this is that if you can make the character someone the reader knows, the reader will care. The reader doesn't have to like the character. Anybody want to have dinner with the Macbeths? Or Iago? Want to hang out with Edmund? But it's interest. It's interest. And the beautiful thing about human beings is that they are capable of this, of caring about a character, that they seek it out and are grateful for it when it happens. Think about how beautiful that is. That's a beautiful thing. That when we pick up a book, we're looking to feel for somebody we never met. We'll never meet. We'll never know. And somehow we find ourselves in it. I think just that's what makes us what we are. And I know I've talked about this before, the triadic event. You know, two minds, and there's a third thing. So here we are in 2013 in Sewanee, Tennessee, and here's somebody else in Beijing in 2013, each of them reading a translation of the Iliad, which is the third thing. And there's that moment when Hector takes his helmet off so his baby son can recognize him, and your heart breaks at it. And the guy that wrote it was dust 700 years before Christ. That's a miracle. That's a freaking miracle. And when you sit down to write, you're not different in kind than anybody that sits down to do that. That's the beauty of it. And you can keep yourself writing for a long time when you just understand, I don't have to make a lot of money at this. I'm doing something that is so important and so right as an activity and is beautiful. And I'm taking part in that. And if something happens that people think of as being success or good, that's nice. But some kinds of success are a little bit damaging and scary. It's a dangerous kind of way to go. So, open your hymnals to page 11. And, You are trying to take part in all that when you write fiction. You're trying to tease the reader out of thought by using his senses and by using his powers of imagining to go into a circumstance fully, in context, in terms of the story's canvas of being. And you can't do it with any one tool alone. Context is not only given in explanation, it can be given in every single gesture and element of craft. In fact, it should not be given exclusively with any one thing. But to insist on the close third in instances where a little line would set the context, to neglect to use a line that by its absence makes 15 lines necessary in order to establish a simple fact, well, then you are using dramatic gestures at the expense of clarity, and the whole thing becomes an attempt to parse out matters that have no real bearing on the depth of the story. Who's who, and where are we, and when are we, and what the hell is happening, and why has the silence been broken in the first place? Here's an example of a first-person narration that delivers the thing that absolutely must be there in every story. There's a constant that's true about every story. The same way all of us need oxygen in order to live, this has to be there, which is that the reader must know enough to turn the page. So here is a 9-year-old speaker, and watch. I'm going to give you the context that would make the reader turn the page. I just did this in class, so again, class, forgive me. Here it is. Speaker is a 9-year-old girl. I don't like Ellen's boyfriend, John. John drives that loud car he's so proud of. I don't know why she likes him, but he made her happy last night. She was crying last night. He's going to buy her abortion. I'm going to get me abortion when I get old enough, and I'm going to go down the street making so much more noise than John, people are going to forget he ever existed. Now, she doesn't know what she's just revealed, but the reader knows it. The constant is satisfied. The language is working to tell the story. And all that is only a craft matter that has to do with keeping that constant. So many times I'll have students say, well, but this is an 11-year-old boy. An 11-year-old boy wouldn't say this. He'd say, you got to find a way for the reader to know it because you're not writing the story for other 11-year-old boys. Too often the stance that inexperienced writers take is an attempt to sound like or imitate what they think they see in the fiction they read. But too often they don't see what I'm describing here because the writers they're reading have made them aware of the drama in such a way as to make the context-setting kinds of lines in the story invisible. But they are always there. Even a writer as famously spare as Raymond Carver, his great little story, Neighbors. First line is pure exposition. Bill and Arlene Miller were convinced that the couple that lived across the hall from them led more interesting lives. They are always there. If you look carefully at the stories you read, they are always there, and they are as various tonally and temperamentally as the voice is telling them. And the close third is just one element of the whole piece. In Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants, for instance, everything in the story is told from a distance of near complete objectivity. We don't get the thoughts of either party in that story until the man goes into the station bar, and then it is close third, or close to close third. Everyone was waiting reasonably for the train. But immediately it backs away from close third and moves through to the last line spoken by the young woman, and because all the other elements of the fictional dream have been delivered in that amazing, spare-seeming narrative that purely through the tone of the speeches is full of the matter of the story and gives forth what we do not realize as it is happening, expository material, and because those things have been so well wrought by that consummate artist, her last lines ring through the entire experience. Doesn't it mean anything to you? We could get along. Of course it does, but I don't want anybody but you. I don't want anyone else. And I know it's perfectly simple. Yes, you know it's perfectly simple. It's all right for you to say that, but I do know it. Would you do something for me now? I'll do anything for you. Would you please, 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 please stop talking? And then after he has gone into the station and seen everyone waiting, and there is that word in the sentence, reasonably. Incidentally, I saw a manuscript page, a typescript page, a Hemingway scholar showed me when I was at Holy Cross University. He had it, a copy of it. And there was a long passage. There was a place where people were what they said they were, and where when they told you something, you could trust it. There was a place where the trains ran on time, and the weather was always right, and people told you the truth. And getting smaller, there was a place where everybody told you. There was a place where down to the last line, Everyone was waiting reasonably for the train. And in the margin, in pencil, is written, heh heh. I just love that. I love it. That 28-year-old kid, you know, heh heh. He discovered a brilliancy, and he knew it. And the reader knows really quite well when the woman says, I feel fine, there's nothing wrong with me, I feel fine, knows quite well that by beautiful implication, we get the one there's something wrong with is, of course, the man. The man who is afraid to run the risks of love and is cowardly about it and is, in fact, the one who is unreasonable. And the story is finally about that and not really about abortion at all. The abortion serves as the thing that brings about the revelation of his true nature and of what is so sorrowfully wrong between these two people. Having said all this, I mean to express what I believe is your natural trajectory as writers. We all learn to put people into motion and make scenes, and we can all make exchanges of dialogue that sound like people talking. What you lack at this stage of your development is perfectly normal, and it is the last thing you will come to on your journey to being the writer that you were born to be. And that is the sound of your voice. That voice that knows when and how to tell the story. The voice that will deliver with confidence, elegant summary and analysis and history and the appearance or lack of it of psychological states and the elements of spirit that precede and predicate action. Your voice, the voice of the author. Thank you.